little bit about something near and dear to my heart, and that is wildlife rehabilitation. I'll tell you a bit about how it is that I've come to be a wildlife rehabilitator. We'll talk a little bit about what Millstone Wildlife Center is, and then what rehabilitation is in general. So if you do, as Brad mentioned, have questions, feel free to ask. You don't have to wait till the end. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. So first of all, I am not a veterinarian. I was the kid who brought home wild animals, and thankfully I had parents who indulged me and let me do that. I have a background in animal science and education. So although I thought for a time that veterinary medicine was my calling, I realized that there were other ways to work with animals and chose to work in museums for most of my career. When my husband and I had our third daughter head off to college, it was time at that point that I could include something else. So although I was still working full time, the goal was to begin in a small way taking in animals and rehabilitating them. Well, that was in 2015, and we went from being, the intent was to be small. There is a huge need in every state. In the state of New Hampshire, there are really only a few people. There are 4 of us that do this full time, a few others that take an animal here and there. So what the intent, as I say, was to be small. Last year, we took 1,370 animals, so not small at all. Those animals came in, of course, to my home. So we have really given our house, and at each year it seems that we find some other space that can be dedicated to animal care, animal feeding, and it all happens here. So what does it mean to be a rehabber? What really are we doing? We'll talk a little bit about that. Each rehabilitator needs to be licensed by the state they live in. Each state has different requirements. In the state of New Hampshire, it's required 200 hours for any new rehabilitator to work under a currently licensed facility or individual. And 200 hours is frankly not very long, because in that 200 hours, you're doing a little bit of everything. So you set out and you may in fact encounter an animal that never went to the center where you did your volunteering. But that's how it begins in New Hampshire. And then you're inspected by Fish and Game. You need a veterinarian that can consult, that's comfortable with helping you figure out the answers. And a lot of times it is just trying to figure it out. This is not always a clear-cut path. We have animals and diseases that we're not always sure what the story is, and so we work closely with our consulting vet and any other veterinarians that might happen to volunteer for us, and other rehabbers who are out there and are interested in figuring out the solutions. So most rehabilitators do work from their home. I mentioned this, we live here also, because we're not funded. Sometimes people have the mistaken understanding that a town or a state or the federal government is the funder for rehabilitation. That's not the case. There are a few facilities that do receive, after a lot of grant writing, some funding, and each rehabilitator can choose to become a nonprofit. We are, in fact, 501c3, so that we can receive funding and continue to grow if sometimes I wonder if that's possible to take more animals. It's just to provide better service and make sure that next year all the animals have the vaccines and the medication and everything they need. So most work from home, few are funded. What we do is we treat the animals that the general public has found. So someone may be driving in a car or on a hike or just sitting on the back steps, They see an animal that they feel is injured. They Google wildlife rehabilitator and we pop up. So primarily, we are a resource, whether we ever see that animal or not. Sometimes we're here to let people know that rabbits, for example, very often are not with their young. And so we're educating the public to let them know that this is okay. Don't pick up those babies, watch them for a while. So it can be either just educating, it can be a matter of, yes, the animal you have is clearly in need of coming in. And so we then, if the finder is able, ask the finder to bring that animal to us. Sometimes an animal control officer is able to assist. Sometimes the finder has brought that animal to a veterinarian and we get a phone call from said veterinarian and we arrange pickup. There are certain states that have people whose sole volunteering position is to be a transport person. We don't have much in the way of transport here in the state, so we rely on our own volunteers that work here at Millstone. Primarily, animals are brought in by those people that find them. So again, there's education involved. You don't want to pick up an animal with bare hands. How do you pick it up? Where do you put it? What do you do for those first steps? So that's all part of it. We are not pest control. We often will get phone calls and people will say, I have woodchucks. I don't want woodchucks. I have a garden. Can you come and remove them? That is not what we do. I'm here if the woodchuck that was eating your garden is injured or something happens, your neighbor traps mom and now you have all the orphans. We will take all the orphans, but we are not trappers and we are not in the business of removing the animals that people often think are pests. It's our mission to let you know how to coexist with them. Or if they're in your home, talk about how you can encourage mom to take her family of or her litter, take everybody and move them out without there being an intervention from pest control or anyone else. So that's basically what we're doing. At Millstone Wildlife Center, we're a mammal facility. So plenty of people may want to rehabilitate birds. That's a separate license. We are federally licensed, but our federal license allows us to exhibit animals, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So we're primarily a mammal facility. It doesn't mean that we haven't had birds here while we are in contact with a rehabber that can treat them. That sometimes happens, and we certainly have worked with turtle rehabbers and other veterinarians that may have done the job of gluing together a turtle or helping an animal heal, and they do come here. But primarily, our numbers are mammals. Now, what do we do in a given day? And again, feel free to jump in. I'm going to just keep on talking unless I hear that there are questions that you'd like me to answer specifically. So what is a day in the life of a wildlife rehabilitator? There are some people who still go to work full time. And again, that's what the plan was to work outside, take in a few animals. Not everybody does it 24/7. Here at Millstone, we're 100% volunteer. Both my husband and I do this pretty much round the clock as need be. This time of year in the winter, we don't have the same number of babies. So we are seeing a lot of injured animals. We are overwintering those animals that weren't quite ready to go. And we have 35 animals, which may seem like a lot, but in the summer, 150 is not uncommon. So 35 is a piece of cake. This is the time of year where we are painting the room that the raccoons made a mess of, where we are making sure we have the supplies we need, that our incubators are cleaned out, and we're ready to go for spring. We're looking for our interns, and we rely heavily on interns. We last year had 9. This year we hope to have more, and that is the only way that we could take this number of animals. There just are not that many hours in the day to do the things that we do. And what it is that we do.
Frannie, there are, oh, sorry to interrupt you. There are a
Yep,
couple
no,
questions.
please interrupt. Go
Okay,
ahead.
yep, there are a couple questions. One of the questions is, uh, what kind of species do you work with? You know, it's understood that it's the mammal realm, but is there a size limit? You know, clearly not moose or probably deer, but
We do not do bear, moose, or deer. Beyond that, the largest animals we see are coyotes. The smallest are the tiniest little mice. And I will say that most of the time to take in pinky mice is just, we don't have the resources to do that because that's a species that eats every hour, on the hour, around the clock. And if we're doing that, we can't take care of the other animals that we've agreed to try to help. But yes, so tiny little ones, your voles, all the way up through coyotes.
wonderful. And then another question is, I'm curious what the most unique or surprising animal you have rehabbed is.
We have only had one river otter, and I guess I would be surprised to have another, but love another experience. We, in fact, built a pond for her because if you have an otter, they need to be able to swim. They need all the experiences, just like every other species. They need to be prepared when you release them. They need to have had the right environment. So we have a pond all ready for the next otter or baby beaver or whoever comes our way, but probably the otter would have been the most unusual.
And if I could just follow up on that, so did you build that on your property yourselves? Or
We did. We found a company that worked with us that allowed volunteers to come help with some of the labor, so the cost was less. But there is a small pond. It's not, we don't have a large one. There's now a small pond built just for her.
that's incredible. And then someone else has a follow-up to that was, were you raising the otter as an orphan or was she an injured adult?
No, this was an orphan. She was found with a dead sibling, no mom in sight. And to tell you that we did our best to find another, many, many hours of calls and letter writing, because this is a species that's very social. She needed a lot of enrichment. We didn't want to be the source of that. We wanted her to have another otter. There were no other otters to be had that were available. There was an otter in Canada, but it's difficult to have an animal move across state lines. Not going to happen to get an otter for her from Canada. So she was raised, and there were moments that we thought, well, maybe we can't do this. Maybe she's always going to rely on humans. But interestingly, they stay with mom close to a year. And when she got to that age, it was clear, just like our teenagers no longer want us to be a part of their lives in the same way. It was very similar with our otter. She got to the point where she knew she could do it, and wasn't relying on us. And we're happy to say she was successfully released.
That's incredible. Wow. And if I could just follow up with one of my own questions on that, um, do you track any of the animals afterwards? Are there any programs, you know, with the state or anything, putting on radio collars or just to see how they do in the wild?
We put up cameras, but there are no programs currently for tracking, not even the bobcats. And we often wonder because many people in the state are doing research about where are the bobcats, where are they going. There's currently no program. So what we do is we will put up a lot of trail cameras and then um, see what we find out. want to see that they move on, basically. Some animals, we call it a hard release. They're ready to go. We open that door and they don't need any support other than maybe a handful of food for that first night. Or there is a soft release. And in that case, we may take an animal in some type of enclosure, leave that enclosure where it is for a bit before we open the door, and then continue to support for a little bit. But unfortunately, no real tracking.
Okay. And then another question from someone, how do you go about learning about each quote unquote new species that comes in? And what's your process for learning to care for it? It's a great question.
We read everything that's out there. We talk to other rehabbers. When we do have a new animal, we are in contact with people throughout the country to see who has raised whatever it is. If it's an otter, at this point, I'm not sure. We've now, I think, had most all the species we're going to have. Pine marten. We haven't had a pine marten, but beyond that, we've seen them all. There's not a lot of information on those unusual animals. So we're extrapolating sometimes. We're working with veterinarians, and if we have a fisher, they are treated like a ferret would be treated. If we have porcupine, we're sometimes taking rodent information because there may not be protocol out there for how much of a med to give a porcupine. So we go based on other rodents.
That's great. Wow. Okay, we're good with questions now, but I may interrupt you as any pop up.
Sure.
Thanks, Frannie.
Yes, please do. So what does a rehabilitator do all day? That's where we've landed right now. Um, this time of year, as I mentioned, we're preparing for spring, but in our busy season, and that starts in about March and goes through the end of September, we're answering the phone very, very often. We're far enough south in the state that we also get a lot of calls from people in Mass, not realizing it's illegal to cross state lines. And we'll hear, well, you're closer to me than anybody else. We can't do that, but we can tell them what to do and what not to do. We feel that sometimes by answering the phone, we can help more animals than had we just let it go to voicemail. Because sometimes in those first minutes or in the first hour, it's pretty easy for people to make a choice that is detrimental. And the people that are finding them want to help. They wouldn't have bothered to stop or pick up or make phone calls if they didn't care. But naturally, most people, when they find an animal, want to feed it. That's their first reaction. Okay, if it's an orphan, let's go to the store and buy milk, or we're going to go to the refrigerator and get out the half and half. Let's feed this baby. So we want to tell people right off the bat, no food, no water. And people get very upset, but it's got to be hungry, it's got to be thirsty. Yes, that's true. We like to reunite with our squirrels. We reunite far more squirrels than we rehabilitate, and we take in, close to 100 squirrels in a year. But the phone calls from tree cutters who have found a nest, or a family who've just come upon a squirrel in the backyard, can be talked through the process of how to get that baby reunited. So part of what we're doing every day is answering questions and reassuring people and working with them about next steps. We do a lot of feeding. Some animals eat every couple of hours, round the clock. So again, it's not, I can't do it by myself. I have people that help, but we're feeding and we're doing a lot of meal prep. So if we have 150 animals, we make vats of food. So it's a lot of chopping and cutting and food prep. It's also procuring that food because our carnivores eat a lot of raw meat, and we'd like to find other ways to feed them other than just going to the grocery store and walking down the aisle and paying top dollar. So some of it is letting our public know, and we're we feel that social media is a good way to reach people, especially those in the area that might want to help. When people clean their freezer, instead of throwing that meat out, my animals don't care if that food is freezer burn. So don't throw it, bring it by. So finding the food, prepping the food. We do a lot of wound care when the animals first come in. They're not coming healthy animals that often. I mean, even if it's an orphan that has no injury, they're coming in cold, they're coming in dehydrated. So we need to do a lot of veterinary work without a veterinarian on staff. As I mentioned, I have a consulting vet. We take a lot of trips to the vet. I'm lucky that he will come here to do vaccines because we vaccinate our animals, our rabies vector, not bats, but our other guys before they leave us. And I have a couple other veterinarians that volunteer on a biweekly basis, so I can have eyes on animals when need be a little more often. But we are checking even that animal that seems healthy, you know, may have something present unusually, and an animal that we think is perfectly disease-free may suddenly surprise us, and now we have symptoms of rabies or something we're far more concerned about. Speaking of rabies, we make sure everyone here is vaccinated. We have protocols in place to keep everybody safe. If there's an animal that we think potentially may have a disease, they're quarantined. Actually, we quarantine even the animals we think are healthy. Certain animals, especially, need to be carefully watched for 14 or 21 days, depending on what we're watching for. So there is the care, the animal care. There's cleaning.
If I could, Franny, just follow up on that with the rabies point. Could you speak to what species are rabies vectors as far as the
Absolutely. So it varies by state. Here in New Hampshire, we consider fox, raccoons, skunks, woodchucks, and bats to be the 5 rabies vector, which means they can carry rabies. They don't always show the symptoms, a little like when you probably heard of someone who had COVID without symptoms. Lo and behold, they gave it to a whole host of people. Same thing is true with rabies. They can carry it and seem perfectly healthy and years later present with the disease.
And another follow-up, when you take, these animals to the consulting vet, does the vet cover the cost of those vaccines and that work, or how does that work out?
It depends. We go case by case and vet by vet. Excuse me. Most will offer their time, and we are paying for the materials. We're paying for the vaccines, or we're paying for the ultrasound procedure, or not the time of the vet. So it really depends. Vet bills can be high depending on what's needed. Medication, we're purchasing that either from a vet or from a pharmacy. So it's a big line item in our budget, but we've been very lucky to have vets who want to help us out wherever they can.
That's great. And we have 2 more questions. I don't know if you'll cover these, but I'll just go through it right now.
Sure.
How do the animals typically react or interact with you and other humans? Is the first one.
It depends on the species. When we get orphans that are very young, maybe even eyes closed, they tend to be fairly comfortable around us when they're young. And as they age, then they show more appropriate behavior. We don't mind if a raccoon is handleable when they're being bottle fed because we need to pick them up and feed them 8 times a day. So it's certainly a whole lot easier than if we're trying to manhandle snarling animals. So I would say we have both ends of the spectrum. We have 2 bobcats here currently. One came at 5.5 weeks old, and at the time wasn't really frightened. as he's aged, he's becoming more of a bobcat. His his friend, his what he believes to be his siblings, they don't share parents. He's not biologically related to her. She came at 5 months old and she knew she was a bobcat. So the only way we ever handled her from day one was if she was sedated.
Great. And then the other question is, what is the longest an animal has stayed with you all?
We have animals that never leave us. So when an animal comes, the goal is release. Sometimes that may be a few weeks, sometimes that may be 10 months. If they are not releasable, we then struggle with what is the appropriate course of action. There are some animals, if they can't be released, it's kinder to euthanize. And euthanasia does mean just that. It's a kind death. Sometimes we choose that because we can't control pain. We know that this animal is suffering. There's no surgery. There's nothing that can be done. It's a pretty easy call when they first come in. It's far more difficult when you have an animal that is seemingly okay, but can never live on their own. They can't climb or they can't find food for themselves. They may be blind. What do you do at that point? Well, that is why we have our federal license, and we have that so that we can exhibit animals. And this may be a good time for me to introduce you to one of them. We are licensed up to 50 animals right now. The goal is, again, not to have those animals, but we have them so that if we do programs outside, we have some that can travel with us. So we have a Virginia opossum who is about 3 years old, which means she's a little old lady. Possums in the wild live about 2 years. And that is our next goal, if possible, so the animal can live comfortably and live a life that we feel is not, we're not torturing the animal, obviously, but I mean, we don't want them to be miserable. Then we consider them staying with us forever and being an ambassador.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I don't think there's any objections if you wanted to bring yeah.
All right, I'm going to step to the side for a second and bring my possum. Okay, the room we're in today typically is the room for our babies. You see behind me incubators and the like, but we also have Millie, and Millie lives in this room. And Millie can't be released because she doesn't have all of her toes. She can't climb, she couldn't really maneuver to get around very well. So possums are a great ambassador animal. Most people nowadays are coming to realize that they're really a good species to have in the environment. There was a day when people thought more that, oh, they look like a rat, they have a rat tail, they're not very attractive. We don't want opossums in our yard. But Millie is a good teacher and is easy to handle. You'll see I still have gloves on. Part of what I do when I'm teaching is to remind everybody to always wear gloves when you pick up an animal. And although Millie is not rabies vector, and I know that she's, disease free because she's been here so long, we do want to teach everyone, wear gloves when you pick up an animal, right, Millie? Any questions about opossums? Would you like me to tell you a little bit about what possums do and why they're so special?
There are a couple questions. So are Millie's ears naturally black or are they frostbitten? And then also with that, does she go outside in the warmer months?
She does go out for walks. She lives indoors. They are naturally black. We haven't painted them. They aren't, nor are they frostbitten. So those ears are the regular size for an opossum. But we do find that possums that come in the winter um, tend to have frostbitten ears and toes and tails. She, however, has all of her ears. It's her tip of her tail and her toes that are not there. But
And
she likes frost.
how did that happen? Was that frostbite or?
Well, we always have to go by what the finder says if we didn't see it happen. There was some discussion of maybe a cat came in contact with Millie, but it looks like the toes are gone. It looks to be frostbite. I would say that, regardless of how she lost them, um, she can't get around very well.
And when you say you go out for walks with her, is that like in a pen or is she on a?
She can't run away, so no pen needed. We'll have volunteers that take her to different areas so she can see and smell different things. You see, they rely on their sense of smell, which is why as we sit here, her nose is going. She's wondering what's around. Maybe I brought snacks. Unfortunately, Millie, I did not. She just ate her dinner, so she should not need a snack. But yeah, she'll go outside and just walk in the grass. No harness needed because she's not very fast.
Wonderful. And then another question, what do you feed her?
Opossums are omnivores. In the wild, they eat a little bit of everything, whatever they find. She would eat roadkill in the wild. She would eat leaf litter. She would eat insects. Here, we vary her diet. The base is cat food. And then we make sure she has lots of vegetables, a little bit of fruit, and of various forms of protein. We change that up a little bit. Her favorite is grapes.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And then, yeah, a comment of please do tell us why opossums are so important.
Well, possums are the only North American marsupial. That's not as much about why they're as important or just a fun fact, but they are out there eating insects, which most people like. They're cleaning up our roads. They really are a good animal to have in your backyard. They're going to help keep down the rodent population. And even if they don't catch them, they'll clean up any debris that people have or animals have left behind.
And if I could just follow up too with when you take her, so to do programs, how does that kind of process work? Is it
Well,
school?
she is not handled except for by me, or I'll put her down and let her walk a little and just move around a little bit. Um, but we talk about possums, we talk about what they do, the fact that being a marsupial means that they have a pouch. They can have up to 20 babies born, but they have only 13 nipples. Those babies are going to stay for about 40 days inside of her pouch. And then baby possums will climb out and hold on to mom. They tend not to be really good at keeping track of their babies. And we get a lot of our young ones because maybe she was walking and a dog barks and one of the kids falls off and they don't keep track. If you're a skunk, you're going to get back to your den and you're going to be like, oh, I left somebody behind, and you're going to go back and find them. I'm just going to rearrange her. But possums don't do that. So if you find a possum who is smaller than, not counting the tail, 7 inches, chances are they fell off a mom. Um, so always let a rehabilitator know. Anyway, back to other reasons we get our possums. They, as I mentioned a couple times, they do clean up roadkill. Unfortunately, they are not paying attention to where the cars are when they do that. So very often they will lose their life while they were having their dinner. If you are comfortable, and I hope everybody will become so if you're not, please stop if you see an opossum that's hit on the road. You may not be able to help this adult opossum, but you might save up to 13 lives for little babies that are inside. Call a rehabber. They will talk you through the steps, whether or not you are going to just bring that whole mommy in with all the babies or bring just the babies. But please stop for possums.
That's a great point. I was going to ask you that question about, the road-killed adults and checking for babies. What do you suggest as far as if people are interested in doing that? Gloves, that process.
It's a good idea if you're someone that will stop not only for an opossum, if you find a rabbit hit in the road, whatever it is, good idea to keep some supplies in your car, an emergency kit. So a cardboard box, some gloves, thicker gloves are always good, but I have just a thin glove here, something to keep the animal warm. Often an injured animal is suffering from being in shock and their body temperature is not where it should be. So the little hot hands that people put in their gloves or in their boots in the winter, that's pretty good to have. A flashlight is always handy. Keep a list of rehabbers in your area. Depending on the state, they're often listed on a website. There's also a handy app that everybody should know. You can download Animal Help Now, and that will put you in touch with a rehabilitator wherever you are. So if you happen to go to Texas on vacation and you come across an armadillo and don't know what to do, if you have that app, your app will tell you who's the closest armadillo rehabilitator.
Oh, that's amazing. I'll put that up, have that on our website too, associated with this to remind folks. I wasn't aware of that app. That's great. Another question, not very Millie specific per se, but do different species interact at your rescue? And if so, how do they get along?
We don't typically put different species together. I won't say never because when they're very young, we will sometimes put different species of animals in an incubator. When they are really young, they need another warm body. They don't really care. We've had an opossum and a squirrel raised together to a point. Now the point will come when the opossum, we don't take them on into adulthood, but when they're really young, we put them in incubators together. Our other larger animals, they may see others, other species, but typically it's a single species in an enclosure.
Nice. I think we're caught up on all the questions. So Millie, I only recently realized that opossums are very short-lived.
Sadly, yes. And I had just given her a break. She was tired of being held up. We'll lift her up again here. Yes, and even in captivity, they are still short-lived. So their bodies just sort of, after a couple of years, their organs are not doing what they should be doing. So two in the wild, as I say, she's 3 and she's an old girl.
All right. Well, she looks in good hands for sure there, and happy. That's great. Wonderful. Well, I'll let you keep on going. And, we're good on questions for now.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind, what I'll do is just put Millie back into her enclosure and then we can talk some more.
Sure. And I want to thank everyone for the questions. This is wonderful to have a more interactive program here. Enjoy this.
Right. She is back and can finish her dinner, and I can tell you a little bit more about some of the other things that we may or may not do. I guess the providing the medical care is primarily what our days are like. And people sometimes think, I believe, that we're just here holding cute little animals and handing bottles and that's all. We see a lot of injuries that are just ones that we can't fix. So it's difficult. And we warn our volunteers when they come that there will be days that you will go to feed an animal. It may be an animal you fed yesterday, it may be an animal you've cared for, and they may not survive. We have some species that are considered to have capture myopathy, which basically means they are so nervous from being in captivity that it can affect their heart. Rabbits are one of them, deer are one of them, foxes. So we want to tell the public too, when they come across an animal, there are certain species, if you chase it, you see that it's got a cut. If you're chasing it around the yard, you may have just shortened its life. Sometimes letting it heal on its own, if it's a minor injury, is better than scaring it literally to death. We also like to let people know when they bring us an animal, so a few things we recommend. First, put it in a box with a lid or a carrier of some kind. The animal that now seems like they're docile by the time you drive here, that may change. One of our bobcats that I mentioned was put in the front seat of a car, driven to our vets where we picked it up from. By the time he got to the vet's office, she was no longer handleable. So always have it in something with a lid. We also don't want to come to the car and have to worry about chasing around your car or anywhere else an animal that's injured. We want people to keep them warm. We want people to travel quietly because you might naturally think, well, I have a podcast I'm going to listen to or music and crank it up. That's not comforting at all, of course, to the animal. We also don't want you to handle it. It's our natural instinct to pet the animal and say, you'll be all right. I'm going to get you help. Just pet it and love it. And that the animal expects that you're going to eat it for dinner. Basically, is you're a big predator. Even if you are getting it help, they don't realize that. So again, education comes into play in talking to the people, even in the brief conversations we have when we know that animal has to come into us. We help people know what to do if you find an animal such as a fox with mange. We get many, many calls in the fall. It's unfortunately something that's fairly common in our foxes. People want to help, but we can't do that unless the animal is contained. People don't realize that you can't just throw out some medication and have it given safely. So we talk them through what's okay, what's our protocol, how potentially to get that animal so that it can come in for treatment.
I wonder, Frannie,
Go ahead.
if you could speak to, so you said 1,370 animals, I believe,
Yes.
a year. If you could talk about, kind of how that's distributed, if there's big, probably imagine rabbits are a lot, squirrels, if you could talk to how many roughly, across the spectrum.
So our largest number is definitely Eastern Cottontail. We tend to get more than 700 bunnies in a year. The only way that we can treat that many bunnies, first of all, at about 28 days, mom is done with them. So they can be released at a far younger age, whereas, porcupine may stay with mom for a year. So it's a lot longer commitment on our end. So it's fairly short treatment. The other problem with bunnies is they very often don't survive. An injured bunny is really at high risk for failure. They are stressed. A bunny that comes in and it was nursing, once we start to add in hays or grasses, their stomach tends to have a lot of issues. So bunnies are hard to raise. We have a fairly good success rate. A lot of rehabbers may only release 25% of the bunnies that come in. We are much higher and we're about 50%. And we have to remember the other 50% may have come in injured or cat caught or with other problems. So we can get a lot out the door, but bunnies are difficult. We have bunnies being the most and possums being the next most. Um, but we see all the species, and I do also have some photos that I'll show you. I'll encourage you, if you're interested, as I mentioned, our social media page, Millstone Wildlife Center, is Facebook. We also have Instagram. And there you can see 5 days a week, we try to put up a photo or video or something educational. We may post a flying squirrel video. Today was flying squirrel with an enrichment, but we'll also tell you what you need to know about them or the fact that they live in colonies. So I'll encourage you to check that out. I'll also share some pictures with you, and I can do that now if you'd like, and then see if you have any other questions. All right, now give me a minute. Here's my share. Let's see. And I'm not finding what I want to find. Or maybe I will not be sharing it. We'll give it one more shot. Yes, I am not.
Is it the Zoom options that you're trying to figure out which
So
one?
I have there's an iCloud album that has some of our photos that I was going to share with you. And I have many other things that are open. You'll take my word for it. The animals are just really very, very special. We're able to get closer than you might otherwise be in proximity with these animals. We do it in ways that we use a lot of cameras if it's an animal we don't want to be in with for our safety or just for them getting used to us, but a good way to learn more about the animals that are care.
And I wonder, I have two questions. One is, what are the major causes of injury that, animals come in with, and maybe certain types are more prone to certain types of injuries, whether human induced or otherwise?
Many come because of cats. That could be a whole other discussion. Cats, I feel, need to be indoors. If they're outside, they very often bring little presents to people. So we have a lot of cat-caught animals. Dogs also, they go outside, but they're doing what dogs do. Certain breeds are off hunting. We do see a lot of animals that are coming in now with rodenticide poisoning. So we encourage people not to use any form of rodenticide or glue traps. We unfortunately have to peel animals from the glue. So it is because of humans, whether that be the car you were driving, or sometimes not. A predator maybe caught mom is not there, and the babies come out looking for mom, and the babies come in, and we try to do the job and raise those orphans for her.
And then, yeah, I know the rodenticide is a big issue and it's increasing with raptors and all that. How about I know one of your main the main goal, right, is to release these animals back into the wild in a as natural state as possible. How do you go through that process, once you've had them and ensuring that they don't get accustomed to you as humans?
When we know that they show natural fear, when they can catch the food on their own or they're comfortable, they're obviously going to be weaned and having a natural diet, then we start scouting for places for these animals. They very often can't go back where they came from. Sometimes that's because the cat brought in the animal. I'm not going to put the animal back on that property and have the cat do it all over again. Sometimes we pick a new animal because we make family groups here. Bunnies also do better with others. If I get 6 individual bunnies brought in, they are now a family and they're going to go together as a group. So I can't very well, if one's from one town and the 5 other towns, we have to pick a good location. So we're considering a water source and food source. We're considering what sort of animals would, if it's on private property, are there dogs? Are there outside cats? We very often will look for state property, and we want to make sure as best we can that these animals are put in a spot where they're close to their natural habitat.
Wonderful. And then as we I only have a few minutes left here, I definitely wanted to ask you, as you know, your organization and you know, I think a lot of people probably are realizing, you know, you're doing this out of your home, right? And you're spending a lot of your own time and likely a lot of your own money. What what can the public do to help you all in rehab organizations like yourselves?
Well, if you find an animal, when you drop that animal off at the rehab, or putting a $20 bill in the blanket with the animal is certainly going to help. But there are other ways other than just monetary ways. And most rehabilitators that do have 501c3 at least are doing those fundraisers like Giving Tuesday. There are other state fundraising days like Give New Hampshire. I'm guessing Massachusetts has a similar one. But other ways that you can volunteer, perhaps you have a skill. Perhaps you're someone who can help mend the cages. There's always work to be done. The animals, one where from wear and tear from the weather, or the animal itself, we're doing a lot of repair work. Perhaps you don't mind picking up a load of laundry once a week and throwing that in. The laundry is tremendous. We have been blessed to find someone who 3 days home, that is a big, big job. So perhaps you can make food at home. You can make possum food, or you can do the shopping, or you can transport an animal that needs to go to a vet. There are many other ways. Of course, some people want to come and have that hands-on experience, so you can certainly, if the rehabilitation facility has the means to allow volunteers, consider becoming vaccinated if they do rabies vector and can clean cages or help with whatever things they have, depending on the time of year and the species that are there.
Those are such great points about all those other things that you don't even think about, right? That a lot of us don't think about. Yeah, the laundry, the fixing the cages, all that. Like that everyone's got different skills. You know, maybe some people are good at fundraising, you know, and they can use that to help you, you know, or whatever it
Yes.
is. Wow. Do you ever get a break, Franny? Are you ever able to like leave your home? Quite seriously,
It's
like, yeah.
it's a challenge to, so typically my husband or I stays. If one goes out, one of my fears is that someone will drop an animal and not call first. So I want there always to be someone here. If for some reason we both are out, we do have volunteers that are also licensed, and I'd rather have someone skilled so they could treat a wound or know who to call or where to go. But to leave the house, the two of us, it takes a lot of preparation. We make a lot of meals in advance and have, a lot of backup that goes into that. It's not very often that we leave the house.
Um, I cannot even imagine. And when you say the numbers that you all have and just, you know, their needs of every 2 hours, some of them have to get fed. It's just, it's mind blowing. And
We
thank
lose
you.
a lot of sleep. So this time of year, we're resting up and, as I say, painting and fixing and doing whatever we need to do so that once those babies roll in March, we're ready to go.
Yeah, and I will, our organization, and I follow you on Instagram, your organization, and I love how much education, how big of a piece that is. And I think that's such an important um avenue, and kind of role that you all play as well on top of everything else you do. And I really appreciate that. And definitely encourage everyone. You get some nice videos in the morning of like a porcupine crunching, and it helps boost their kind of, the mental health, I think, which is just, but it's really inspiring, Frannie, what you've taken on and what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really so appreciate you being here tonight, and we're going to post this online. And we'll also, any other information, Franny, on ways we can help, we'll post that as well on our site next to this video.
Fabulous.
Yeah,
Well, if anyone has further questions that we didn't talk about, you can find me through those means, reach out, and we have through our website or whatever other means, and I'd be happy to try and answer them.
wonderful, Franny. And people are commenting here. Thanks so much. This was outstanding. Big thanks for you all for your time and efforts. Best wish for coming years.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight.